I mean, you get representatives in the House and the Senate who have no background whatsoever in national security. And regardless of what they say on the campaign trail or the fact that their constituents, Republican and Democrats alike, want a more restrained foreign policy, they go to D.C., they get brought into the skiff at some point in time, and they get told, some really compelling information, I'm sure. And the next thing you know, they're voting in accordance with exactly what, the military-industrial complex, the foreign aid machinery wants.
Why did you decide to run for Congress?
Man, the short answer is 2020. I mean, that was about a year after Shannon was killed. And I had transitioned out of, going overseas and getting shot at for a living. And it was probably the first time I had really paid attention to domestic politics. I'd always voted, but I was really focused on foreign policy, just with our last line of work. That's kind of where your head goes. But coming home to the city and the area that I grew up in, and just seeing what happened during 2020, and then seeing what happened during COVID shocked me. The way that people were just completely accepting of surrendering all their rights to the government. That shocked me. And then the riots. I was living actually just to the south of Portland, Oregon, when the riots happened. After my late wife was killed, I moved pretty close to where my parents are just to get my kids closer to my family. And thinking it was still Portland of the 80s and 90s that I grew up in. But watching the riots just ravage downtown Portland, and it wasn't so much the riots, it was the fact that people were going along with it. People who should have known better were saying that, oh no, this is probably just, this is about civil rights. This is about racism. And I was pretty quick on. I was like, that's not at all what this is about. I mean, because for those of us who've been overseas and been in hostile environments, it has a feeling. And that's very much the way it felt to me. There's this unchecked violence that's taking place right now. Law and order has broken down, and whoever is the most violent and aggressive and the most organized and willing to use that violence and aggression, they're going to rise to the top. And that's exactly what I saw for all of 2020. So I moved just across the river to a more rural community. And then obviously the election went the way that it did. We can kind of get into the backstory a little bit, but I'd already kind of met the Trump administration and spoken of President Trump at Dover after my late wife was killed. And I was planning on going back and working in a second Trump admin. That's a whole separate story we can get into. But then in the conservative district that I'd moved to just across the river, my congresswoman voted for Trump's impeachment after January 6th. And I was mad. Everybody was mad because she was a Republican. But nobody was stepping forward. There was a lot of people who were politically active in the community who were saying, hey, we're very mad and we're going to censure her. We're going to write her a letter. And I was just like, okay, well, who's stepping forward to actually primary her? Because that's the mechanism. If you're not happy with your elected official, you should run against them or you should support another candidate, especially in a primary. It's really key. A lot of people skip the primaries, but that's how we enforce discipline within our own ranks, is primarying people. And I was pretty disappointed to see that nobody was stepping forward. And then I, had a little bit of self-reflection based on my background in the military. And if you're looking around to see who's in charge, well, congratulations, it's you, in absence of orders attack. So I just said, you know what, I'm at least going to run. I'm at least going to give her a challenge so that she knows that we, the people, are not happy with her. Ultimately prevailed in the primary, but then general didn't go as planned, but we were really close, less than a percentage point in the general. So here I am again, running for Congress. So keeping the fight up.
Why did you? I mean, a lot of people. I'm interested in why you decided to run for Congress rather than more of a local political spot, because I think a lot of people are starting to think that the federal government is just it's lost. It's gone. And people seem to be concentrating more on local elections because that's your immediate sphere of influence. That's what actually probably affects you more than anything.
It does.
And so I'm just curious, did you consider running for local at all?
I didn't, because I had never really considered running for office until the woman I voted for, my congresswoman, voted for Trump's impeachment. She had a couple other bad votes there that kind of put her on my radar. But I assumed that somebody else, especially after she did something that was so against the will of her voters, I assumed that somebody else, maybe that was already in local office, that already kind of had a name for themselves and a political machine built up, that they would step forward. And so just seeing nobody step forward, that's why I went for that position in particular. I think with my experience, though, in the military and in the intelligence community, I think I'm best served at the federal level. because the way that the federal government has ran off the reins, especially the way they spend so much of our money on foreign aid, foreign wars. And we see this all the time. You get representatives in the House and the Senate who have no background whatsoever in national security. And regardless of what they say on the campaign trail or the fact that their constituents, Republican and Democrats alike, want a more restrained foreign policy, they go to D.C., they get brought into the skiff at some point in time, and they get told, some really compelling information, I'm sure. And the next thing you know, they're voting in accordance with exactly what, the military-industrial complex, the foreign aid machinery wants. Whereas I think if you have more people who are from that world and well-versed in it, we can kind of call them on their BS and say, like, okay, wait a sec, what is this information? What's the plan? How will sending hundreds of billions of dollars every year to Ukraine, for instance, how will that change the actual stated outcome? Ask real hard questions so that we can actually start allocating a lot more resources towards the American people. Because I think especially in our lifetime, post 9/11, the way that we've focused exterior on the rest of the world's security, that's put the American people last. And I think a lot of that is coming home to roost right now. But I think it's hard for folks who aren't from that world and well-versed in the national security state just to understand exactly how we, the people, are being scammed by our government.
Man, that's a damn good point. I didn't think about the military industrial complex stuff. I mean, I think about it all the time.
Yeah.
But to have guys in there that understand it, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. So thank you for clarifying, and we'll get a lot more into the weeds on that towards the back end of the interview. But for now, let's just keep it about your life story. Yeah. And so let's start at childhood. Where did you grow up?
So I was actually born in a cabin, believe it or not, in a little town called Lebanon, Oregon, which is just to the south of Eugene. My dad had gotten a job with the Forest Service. And so my dad was out there working as a forest ranger. So I was the first kid they had, and they decided to do it adventurous and have me at home with a midwife in a log cabin. But then after that, we moved right away. My parents both got into law school. So my first couple of years we were in Eugene. But then by the time I was 5, we moved up to Portland. So I really grew up in Portland.
Right on. What were you into?
So pretty much anything outdoors, anything that was related to like the military, outdoor adventures. I was actually really lucky. My area had a great Boy Scout community. So I was really heavily involved in Boy Scouts pretty much until the time I joined the Army.
They just changed the name of the Boy Scouts?
Breaks my heart, man.
Is that real?
It's real, yeah.
What did they change it to?
I think they just I think it's just Scouts now or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. They've had some hard years, and like they're not what they used to be, unfortunately. Man. Yeah. It's sad because that was an institution where you could send your sons off to, and they were going to be in an environment where boys could be boys for one. You could go off, and that's kind of the way my Boy Scout troop was. Like nowadays, if my Boy Scout troop existed, the Scoutmasters would probably like be sent to jail because they basically were like Lord of the Flies. It was like the older boys run the younger boys, and maybe at the end of the weekend we'll make sure that nobody gets hurt, but you guys just kind of go off in the woods and do your own thing, which is great because I think little boys need that because you got so much of that energy. But it's sad now that that's just like yet another institution that's been closed off to young men where a lot of character could have been formed, a lot of really good life lessons could be taught. You can go and mentor younger kids, and now it's become something that is going to basically adhere to the whims of woke culture. Yeah. And that's what they did. They're a big corporation. They're a big organization. They said, hey, but what about girls? But what about LGBT, LMNOP? And now we have a name change, and they've destroyed yet another great institution.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.